Hello and welcome to Sports Women Connect. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing the future of women's rugby on the African continent. To join me in this conversation is none other than the Vice President of Rugby Africa, Mr. Owor. You're most welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Kindly tell us a little bit more about yourself and your involvement in rugby.
Well, I am, as you've mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Rugby in Africa. But before that, I was the President of Rugby in Uganda.
Okay.
Before that, I was Chairman of Chadondo Rugby Club.
Yeah.
So I've been involved in rugby for coming to 30 years now.
Wow.
I've seen it evolve, at least in Uganda and on the continent.
Yeah.
I've played for Uganda, I've played for the country, and I've seen the challenges that have been there. Now at a stage where I am, with African rugby,
Yeah.
it's pretty much to develop that platform and try and make it much better than what it is. We're not competitive enough as Africa, and I think that's where the challenge is how do we make our countries competitive on the world stage, and in turn grow the game and bring investment into Africa. I think that's key for the sport. It's key for the young girls and boys who are trying to get into the sport.
Yeah.
For them to look, to aspire to play at the world stage.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. And so I think it's a lot of work to be done for Africa, and South Africa has made it, and we're piggybacking on the back of a lot of the stuff they're doing.
Yeah.
But I think South Africa is not enough for Africa. We need to have more competitive countries in there, and you're beginning to see competition coming through from Namibia, from Kenya, from Uganda, Tunisia. So it's how do we grow that? How do we harness that? And with particular now, as you speak, with women's rugby becoming a focus for world rugby as well. How do we get that, exploit that opportunity at the moment, and grow the sport on the continent?
Okay. So just before we move on, what would you say is the current status of women's rugby on the continent? Because I believe you're now in charge of women's rugby. Yeah.
So I kind of godfather women's rugby on the continent, and
kind of, or realistically.
Well, we do a lot of stuff, but I particularly follow women's rugby because it's one of my key targets.
Yeah.
Right now we have 200,000 players, female players on the continent, and that comparatively with the men's cohort side, that's about 20%, which is not where we should be.
Yeah.
I think we have a target of growing this to have a 40% in the next 2-3 years.
Okay.
That will involve the 15s code of the game, because 15s code of the game brings in more participants.
Yeah.
And so that when you talk about participation, that's where we want to be.
Yeah.
We want to grow the 15s code of the game. But the inroads to that, lie in the 7s.
Yeah.
And then that's the catch.
Yeah.
So I think we've seen very good competition from, let's say, the top 2, which is South Africa and Kenya at the moment. Not far behind is Madagascar, and then Uganda, and now we've seen the potential in Zimbabwe and Zambia, and a lot of new stuff going on around the continent. Mauritania has joined the group. Mauritius now looking at getting into women's rugby. Morocco is already there. Tunisia has it. It's just a question of the levels of play, and the competitive nature of the women's rugby at the moment. So I think one of the things we've done in the last year is change that around and bring back the 15s competition.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the things World Rugby has been talking about. We've brought it back.
Yeah.
It's now running. It's vibrant. We need to start expanding it slowly and steadily.
Yeah.
As you know, of course, funding is always a huge factor behind this. So it's important to do it within the kind of means we have. So we can't just get everybody in that competition. We have to try and still select the top group. But we are hoping that as we do this, we begin to gain more interest in these countries and have more women's teams, women's clubs in all these countries actually, you know, aspired to be part of this competition. So that's a key target for us at the moment.
And just for the viewers, what is the vision of Rugby Africa for women's rugby going forward?
Well, there are some things. Well, I'm not at liberty to speak about until we've probably concluded in a couple of meetings the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
But we are looking at getting women's teams to have a similar competition format like the men's teams. So get the Ugandan ladies to go and play in Madagascar. Get Madagascar to come and play in Kenya. And that alone is going to, you know, grow the interest. So we look at this as we want every competition where we've put the men's competition, let's get the women's competition to that level as well. So if we can achieve that, we might not achieve absolute numbers by then, but we begin to say when you're looking for funding as a union or as a country, you find it easier to talk about two codes of the game, the men and the women, at the same time. Because they are not running two different programs. They're actually running similar programs, and it's easier to you know, for example, I just say if you're hosting two countries, it's one venue, you've already paid for all the infrastructure, you've paid for everything. Why not have a ladies team playing at that time at a very high competitive level? So it makes sense economically for you know, being very cost effective for the countries. But as I say, there's a financial implication to this, and this implication is not only for Rugby Africa, it's also for the union itself. Because once we make that commitment, then we're asking the unions to spend more on this particular strategy, which we know that most of the African unions are really struggling to keep it together at the moment. So we have to strike a balance somewhere. We have to come in, we have to ask our partners to come in and help. And if that works out, then we will see a very different 2020 for women's rugby on the continent. So and then the same thing is happening with the sevens. On the sevens front, we had 12 teams in Tunisia. We have seen
up from 10?
the definite interest. You know, you had your 10, and then there were 2 other countries that kept writing and saying we want to be part of that competition. And you find that you've already made a decision that it's going to be 10, but really you have 12. So the question is, what level of play, and how do you maybe bring that competition into a very competitive, high intensity competition that then grows their sevens program on the continent. If you look at the World Series, Africa is not well represented on the women's series.
And that's a fact.
And so we need more women's teams from Africa there. But also you need to give these women's teams not just a slot because they're from Africa, but they need to be competitive. They need to be playing against those other ladies who've been doing this for a long time. They need to be competitive against New Zealand, against Australia. And you know, and that comes from how do we create an environment within Africa that supports them and gets them there. And that's really what the challenge is.
And so in terms of leadership, What are the actions of Rugby Africa to become inclusive on the continent in terms of gender equality?
I think Rugby Africa has spoken, well, not spoken, has sent out the very clear message to its member unions.
Yeah.
In terms of the composition of the executive committees or their boards, it's very clear that on our side we want a certain minimum percentage. So you have to have at least try and achieve 30% if you can. On the Rugby Africa Exco, we do have 2 ladies on that board, which makes up about 20%. But you know, it's a process. So we will have stronger people, stronger candidates who are willing to join and run rugby around Africa. But you notice that for a Rugby Africa level, anybody joining Rugby Africa level needed to have been leading at a union level.
Yeah.
So the emphasis is not even really Rugby Africa.
Yes.
Is how can we get more leaders at the union? Because then you have more people you can pick on and say these are good leaders. They can join the African Continental Committee.
Yeah.
I think that's where the emphasis should be, and the message has been very clear to all the unions that you need to achieve that. I must say, I think I'm impressed with Uganda because that 30% has already been achieved in so many ways. But if you look around the continent, it's not quite the same. Everybody's done 10%, 20%, and I think it's growing. I think it's a process. It will take years to identify these leaders, to push them through, for them to understand the concept, but there are strategies in place from World Rugby to try and do that.
Would we say the Ugandan case is part of your legacy?
Well, yeah, I would say when we came up with the idea, I think it was key for us to try and achieve, and we modeled it in such a way that it was very nice. I liked the concept when we decided that the women's clubs can be members of the union.
Yeah.
Now, when you do that, what you're saying is you don't need men in your club. You can run a women's club, and you can be recognized by the union, and you can grow as a women's club if you want, and you could involve men, but that's your choice. But then what that will do in the long run is I begin to identify a lot more women getting involved in management and leadership within the sport, and that is going to just exponentially grow the numbers you can pick from when you want to put people into management or into leadership. I remember the days we used to struggle when we have a team and you're looking for a team manager, and all the ladies actually saying it must be a man. It must be a man. A woman can't handle this. So it was interesting. But now, as I speak, I think the ladies are very comfortable with having a woman who's team managing, and that's the shift I'm talking about. And I think we need to see that shift across the continent, and we need to see that shift have an impact on the numbers and on the way people view the game. And so, but it will take time.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And in your opinion, in terms of lifting performance and developing competitions, what are the key focus areas?
Well, if you want to improve a competition, very key is for you to create a pathway.
Okay.
And you must sit from an angle of saying, if I were joining this sport or I'm joining this competition, where do I start and where do I end? And I think your task along the way is to make sure that that pathway is good or get it better if it's there, and make it very easy to join the sport, and make it very easy to go up the ranks. And as you do that, You learn more about what the requirement is. For example, if you're joining rugby, you know, at an early age, you're not expected to tackle.
No.
So the stress of I have to make a tackle is not there. Makes it easy for you to join it. But then later, if you want to advance in the sport, then you learn how to tackle, and it's not complicated anymore. But when you're looking at it from the outside, it looks like it's complicated, but it's not. And so that's key, is create that pathway. Secondly, as you create the pathway, involve the community. Because I think a lot of the time we go and create a rugby club and create our own thing, and we are happy in our little world. But the community around you
does not appreciate.
They do not appreciate what you're doing, and so then you can't get the funding because you need the community to come and watch the games. And we call it bums in seats. We need bums in seats so that you can actually start harnessing sport. So if you don't have the people coming to watch, you don't have commercial value. If you don't have commercial value, you can't sell the sport. You can't become professional. You can't, you know. So I mean, that's just one line. That's a trivial example. That's what I'm talking about. So you need to start there and say, we've got a pathway. We've got people watching. We've involved the community. We've got parents involved. We've got the kids involved. We've got teachers. So you find that this to me would be the key starting points there. Of course, training is very important.
Capacity building.
You must train leaders. You must train match officials. Or even if it's not high-level match officials, you must have these people given their duties. And they must know the impact they have on the game, the impact they have on the community. And they must be given their respect. And those people then help ensure that you're actually building character and not just you know, throwing a ball there and letting people run about. So I think those, I would say those are very key components there that one would need to look at.
And from your point of view, how can rugby unions build very vibrant women's rugby cultures from the grassroots to the boardrooms?
Ooh, that's that's you know, I always talk about. I always am amused when people say grassroots. You know, when you plant grass, it's very important to give a bit of manure.
Yes, of course.
It's very important to put manure on the grass and you know, take out the weeds and all that. But equally important is some water and some sunlight. So whilst you have this bottom-up approach, you need to complement it with a top-down approach. Something has to come from up and something has to come from down. And then the grass will grow or the plant will grow. And you know, then you start molding it as you go. So for rugby unions, I would say don't try and focus entirely on a grassroots approach. It's important, but the question is what happens after that. You might produce 10,000 rugby players at
in 1 year.
Yes, in 1 year at a primary school level, and then they don't exist at secondary school level. And then maybe you do that at secondary school level, then there's nothing for them to do at university or at tertiary institution level or at national level. So if you don't have a women's competition at the national level, there's nothing for them, for you to reap the benefit. Because you remember, you're investing all this money
to reach the top,
to build the profile of the country or your union. So if you don't have national competition, what you're doing down here is just, you know, helping a few girls run around and feel happy about it. But
have fun.
What you want is that a percentage of those you've groomed or you've invested in come through the ranks to the next level, and another percentage go through the ranks. But where they are going to become seen is at the top. And for them to be role models, they need that national scene, if you may call it, or even a district scene, national scene, international scene. Then you begin to say that these girls are models that can go back to the schools and talk to the younger girls and say, look, I was there, I suffered, I know, but look, I've made it. And while I'm here, I want you to make it as well. And make it, then they'll help make things better. But if you don't have that at the top that's working, and you're only investing here, you will not get a very healthy plant. And so this is why I say that. So again, it's carefully targeted investment. And I'm not saying that you go take your money and split it into 50-50. No. You might put 10% there and 90% here, but you must strategically invest. And that is different in every community, different in every country, different in every union, because you face totally different challenges in every single union across Africa, especially, and especially the fact that a lot of the African countries still face political challenges. So it's different everywhere.
Okay, and Andrew, as we come to the end, if you had one wish, just one wish, for a girl watching you right now, what would it be?
Well, it depends on the age they're playing at right now. But my wish would be that little girl who's just held a ball in the middle of nowhere. And I'll just tell you a story. I drive up country quite a bit. And in Iganga, there's a Muslim girls' school. I see this girl every time I'm driving past with a rugby ball, and she's teaching little boys how to play. And it's when you tell me what would you wish, is for the little girl who's just touched a rugby ball to become like that woman or girl who is now teaching the younger boys. And what that is because rugby builds character. She has built her character, and so she's now become a community leader, and she's teaching these kids. So other than just the main wish would be, of course, you want that little girl to end up playing in a World Cup or in an international season. But other than that, most importantly, is for her to be empowered, for her to know her place in the community is valued, and for her to actually have an impact in the community. I think that is very key for any woman involved in rugby. I'm not saying that it's any less for the men, but I think women play a special role in the communities anywhere. And if you have a rugby club that does not have a women's team, you can see the difference between that rugby club and the one that has women in it. Yes, sometimes it's the challenges, the challenges involved in that make the club better or make that community better. And so it's key that young girl who's just touched a rugby ball is inspired to become a leader, to become a person who inspires others and can give back to the community.
Okay. Your last words of inspiration?
Right now, I would say anybody who wants to make a change in the community would need to be involved in sport, because it's an informal way of touching hearts. And I would say would need to be involved in rugby, because rugby has the tools, it has the values that you need to be able to have an impact on community. I always say I don't want personally to get involved in any project or anything where I am not going to have an impact on the people, not necessarily on the results, on the people. If I can't have an impact on people, then I feel sad, because there's no use, no amount of money you can throw at something that will change people. But if you're able to touch people and change their perception of things for the better, I think that is what the world needs. So my word would be anybody who wants to have impact. Sport is key. Getting involved with sport and getting involved with things at a level where you can touch people is very key, and that there's a certain satisfaction in that that you can't explain. Yeah. You have to. It's a rite of passage. You have to experience it. Yes. to understand the feel, and I think that is something that I would like everybody to aspire to in their own way. Yeah. And it doesn't mean go and play rugby. No. It might be leadership. It might be encouraging a young girl to go, help her get to that training session every day. The impact you will have on that young girl years to come is going to be huge. Yeah. When she's gained confidence and she can now be a CEO of a big company, she'll look back and say, that person who helped me just get to the rugby games every weekend was the starting point. Yeah. And so that involvement, that's what I mean. They just get involved somehow. Rugby is, I think, the only sport in the world which involves everybody. Yes, it involves everybody. Everybody is involved in the sport. Yeah. And that diversity is good. I like that. And I think that's something we must all aspire to be part of.
Wow. Yeah. Very inspiring words. I'm touched. Yeah. I'm touched, and I just want to thank you for taking your time out to come here and we have this kind of conversation. I hope we can continue with the conversations so that we make people understand that this game is for all of us. And with that, I say thank you very much for tuning in. Until next time, goodbye.